All stories published by Epic Yarn are fictional works intended for mature audiences. These narratives are submitted by a diverse community of contributors and subscribers created solely for entertainment and storytelling purposes. They do not represent real events or individuals, and no claims of factual accuracy are made. Additionally, all accompanying images are generated using AI technology to visually enhance the fictional experience.
Chapter 1. Camden Breakdown. The engine coughed, sputtered, and gave up like a drunk aristocrat. Emmett Hardy leaned back in his leather seat, sighing with theatrical disappointment as his beloved 1966 Alfa Romeo Spider stuttered to a dead stop just outside a nondescript garage buried between a record shop and an old brick wall tagged with spray paint dicks. He squinted out the rain-speckled windshield. The sign was faded, barely legible. Fletcher's garage. Black metal shutters half down. A vintage Triumph motorcycle parked just outside. No reception area. Definitely no cappuccino machine. This wasn't Kensington anymore. Of course, Emmett muttered, pulling on his tweed coat. Break down in bloody Camden and wind up next to a murder shed. He grabbed his satchel, umbrella, and dignity before stepping out into the drizzle. Cold air hit his skin. He straightened his posture. Smiled. Always smile, even when soaked and stranded. He approached the open bay door, where the scent of oil, sweat, and old steel hung thick in the air. Inside, a man stood under the hood of a matte black Aston Martin, arms deep in the engine, back toward him. Tall, broad, built like he could lift the car if he got annoyed enough. "Hello," Emmett called, projecting polite cheer. "Sorry to barge in. My car just died right outside." "She's dramatic like that." The man didn't look up. His voice came low and rough. "What's she doing?" "Making a sound like she's coughing up her will to live." I got a grunt. The man straightened, wiped his hands on a rag, and turned. Oh, he had presence. Not just because he filled the room, though at 6 feet 3 inches and carved like a Greco-Roman statue who'd spent time in the army, he very much did, but because of his face. That quiet authority. Square jaw dusted with stubble, deep-set green eyes that didn't blink nearly enough, short dark hair going gray at the temples, and skin weathered like he'd been fighting nature most of his life and winning. "You got keys?" he asked. Emmett blinked. "To your car, right?" "Yes." He fumbled them out. "Paul Fletcher, I presume?" "You're standing in my garage. Who else would I be?" Emmett grinned. "A ghost. Or a hallucination. I haven't eaten lunch." Paul didn't laugh. Just stepped past him without a word, walking with that kind of quiet power that made Emmett's mouth go dry and his brain wander to indecent places. He watched Paul open the Alpha's bonnet with practiced ease. "What's a posh bloke like you doing driving this old Italian mistress through Camden anyway?" Paul asked without looking up, trying to suffer more artistically. Another grunt. "Well, you're halfway there. You're very encouraging. Is that part of the Camden mechanic package?" Paul finally looked at him, eyes sharp, dissecting. "Do you want her car fixed or not?" "I want to be spoken to gently," Emmett said, lips twitching. Paul didn't smile, but his eyes narrowed like maybe he almost got the joke. "Give me a few hours. Might be the fuel line. Might be the carb. Or maybe she just doesn't like you." "Who does, really?" Emmett said, stepping back, watching the man work. "You know, you're a bit of unicorn." Paul didn't pause. "Yeah. Rugged. Brooding. And you didn't comment on my car being cute. Most men do. That's because I'm not most men." Something about the way he said it made Emmett's spine straighten and heat pool low in his belly. "Right," he said, softer now. Duly noted. They stood there, tension stretching between them like the steam rising from Emmett's car. Paul leaned down again, big hands gripping the engine block, shirt clinging to his back in the damp air. Emmett had no right to stare the way he did, but he did anyway. The rain picked up outside. Camden went quiet. Inside the garage, something unspoken crackled to life, hot and slow and building. Paul didn't look up, just said, voice low, "There's a kettle in the back. You want to be useful? Make tea." Emmett's lips parted. "Did you just flirt with me?" "No, I just don't like crap tea. Flirting and standards. God help me." And then he did what he rarely did, obeyed someone else. Chapter 2. Proper tools, wrong hands. Paul's garage smelled of hot metal and brake cleaner, but he barely noticed. He was focused on the task, teaching Emmett Hardy how to use a torque wrench without stripping a vintage Alpha cylinder head bolt. Precision was everything. One wrong turn and the engine could seize. Emmett, on the other hand, was focused on Paul's forearms, the way his sleeves hugged each bicep as he demonstrated proper technique. "Hold it here," Paul instructed, guiding Emmett's hands onto the chrome handle. His fingers brushed Emmett's, and for a split second, or maybe two, Paul hesitated, catching himself. He cleared his throat. "Not that hard. You'll snap the bolt." Emmett pressed down with just enough pressure to hear the satisfying click. "Like this." "Yeah." Paul's tone was clipped, but his eyes lingered. "Now slowly." "Controlled." Emmett nodded, chewing on his bottom lip. "Controlled," he repeated. He twisted the wrench and met with that reassuring click-click. He looked up, proud. "Good," Paul said. "You've got a steady hand." He reached forward, adjusting Emmett's grip. His palm brushed the warmth of Emmett's skin. "Like this." Emmett's breath hitched. "Thanks for the personal coaching." Paul pulled back, annoyed at his own flicker of interest. "You asked." He dipped back under the hood, inspecting the spark plugs. "Next step is testing the compression." Paul handed him a pressure gauge. "You know how to use this?" "I've Googled it a dozen times." Emmett made a show of flexing his fingers. "I swear, I'm not completely useless." Paul snorted. "We'll see." He kneeled beside Emmett. "Put this here," he tapped the valve, "and crank the engine. Don't kill yourself." Emmett twisted to fire up the ignition. The engine roared, and the pressure gauge jumped. He handed it to Paul. Their elbows bumped. Emmett's heart thudded. Paul's green eyes met his, expression unreadable. 140 psi, Paul announced. "She's healthy. Let's take her for a spin." "Spin," Emmett whispered, tasting the word like a promise. Paul handed him the keys. "You drive," he said. "I need to see how she handles." Emmett slid into the driver's seat, glancing back at Paul. "You sure you don't want to?" "I'll watch." Paul interrupted, leaning against the doorframe. "Don't get cocky." Emmett grinned, started the engine, and eased out onto the Camden streets. The rain had let up, and the city smelled of wet asphalt and fish and chips from a nearby shop. He felt alive, thrilled to be behind the wheel of something beautiful, and even more thrilled that Paul was watching every move. They circled the block, narrow alleys, a row of colorful market stalls, a flickering street lamp. Emmett pushed the Alpha a little faster, tapping the gas when he hit a straight. He glanced at Paul, ready for approval. Instead, Paul folded his arms, leaning heavy on his leather jacket. His jaw clenched just enough that Emmett wanted to reach out, hook a finger under it, and tilt his face upward. "Not bad," Paul said when they returned. "But you overdid the throttle." Felt twitchy on the clutch. Emmett slid out of the car, heart still pounding. "Sorry." Enthusiasm. Paul stepped close. "Your enthusiasm nearly burned out the clutch plates." He reached inside the car and flicked a lock switch with one finger. Their faces were inches apart. The air charge between them smelled of oil and something more, salt and want. Emmett swallowed. "Show me again?" Paul's gaze darkened. He didn't answer with words. He simply hooked his fingers through Emmett's belt loops and guided him back into the seat. Emmett felt the press of Paul's thighs behind him, warmth seeping through his jeans. "Hold the wheel," Paul murmured into Emmett's ear. His breath was rough. "Don't move." Emmett obeyed, pulse soaring. He felt Paul's hand slide from his waist to his hip, thumb brushing the denim's edge. He let a shiver escape. Paul pressed against him, voice low and urgent. "You need more control." He shifted closer, the hard outline of his erection unmistakable. "And practice." Emmett's mouth went dry. "I understand." Paul's hand twined with his at 12 o'clock on the wheel. "Grip it like your life depends on it." He moved his other hand to Emmett's thigh, kneading muscle through fabric. "But don't be afraid to let go sometimes." Emmett closed his eyes and leaned into Paul's touch. His mind went fuzzy, focusing only on the feel of Paul behind him, guiding, teaching. His breathing hitched. He surrendered to the sensation, letting the tension crackle between them. A sudden horn blared. Emmett jerked upright, heart in his throat. Paul straightened, stepping back. He rolled his shoulders like he was brushing off something he shouldn't have let in. "Lesson's over," he said, voice clipped. "Get out of my car." Emmett stumbled out, cheeks flaming. He looked up at Paul, expecting judgment. Instead, he caught a flicker of something. What? Regret? Surprise? Paul cleared his throat, turning to the garage. "I'll have your clutch replaced by tomorrow. Then you can go crash it again somewhere else." Emmett squared his shoulders. "Can't wait." His voice came out breathless, but steady. Paul didn't look at him as he walked away. But Emmett saw his shoulders tense, his stance firm. He was brewing a storm, and Emmett was ready to swim in it. As Emmett tucked his keys into his pocket and slipped back under his tweed coat, he almost laughed, equal parts triumph and relief. He'd survived lesson 2, and he learned more than he'd bargained for. Behind him, Paul returned to the Aston's hood. But Emmett didn't need to look back to know those green eyes were following him. He could feel the heat tracking his steps out of the garage, proof that some tools, once wielded, couldn't be put away. Chapter 3: Kensington Cocktails. The museum was polished, bright, and cold as hell. A far cry from Paul's Camden garage, where oil pooled in corners and the air was always thick with heat and steel. Here, everything gleamed. Marble floors, glass display cases, and a long line of aging aristocrats wearing blazers that had never seen a wrinkle. Paul stood just inside the exhibit hall, glaring at a bronze Etruscan helmet like it had personally offended him. He wasn't even sure why he was here. Scratch that. He knew exactly why. Emmett Hardy. Emmett had slipped Paul an invite a few days ago, casual as anything. "If you're bored of Greece and want to hear me mumble about dead empires while wearing a very tight waistcoat." Paul should have said no. But here he was shaved, showered, and crammed into the only button-down shirt he owned that didn't smell like diesel. He glanced toward the far end of the room where Emmett stood, one arm tucked behind his back, the other gesturing animatedly at a display case holding a rusted Greek amphora. A crowd of museum patrons, mostly older, mostly bored, listened as he spoke. Paul couldn't hear the words, but he didn't need to. Emmett was in his element. He moved like he was performing, posture straight, eyes lit up, voice smooth as whiskey. He looked stupidly good in that navy waistcoat and crisp white shirt. His sleeves were rolled up just enough to show lean forearms, and his sandy blonde hair was pushed back, slightly tousled like he'd just stepped off a yacht. It pissed Paul off how badly he wanted him. A waiter passed with champagne. Paul grabbed a glass, not because he wanted it, but because he needed something to do with his hands. He made it through 10 whole minutes of watching Emmett work before Emmett finally noticed him, eyes catching Paul's, mouth twitching into a knowing grin mid-sentence. Paul's stomach dropped. A few minutes later, Emmett wrapped up the lecture. The crowd politely applauded, and Paul was already halfway through his second glass of champagne, which tasted like carbonated regret. Emmett came sauntering over, a slight sheen of sweat at his temples, energy still crackling around him. "Didn't think you'd come," he said, eyes scanning Paul from top to bottom. "You clean up alarmingly well." "You talk a lot when you're showing off," Paul said. Could barely hear myself think. Was that a compliment or a complaint? Bit of both. Emmett grinned and plucked the champagne flute from Paul's hand, finishing it in one sip. "This stuff's garbage. There's real whiskey in my office upstairs. Come on." Paul raised an eyebrow. "That a line?" "No," Emmett said. "That's desperation. I've been talking to octogenarians all night who think I'm straight. Please." He didn't wait for an answer, just turned and started walking. Paul followed like an idiot. They climbed a narrow flight of stairs and slipped into a small office tucked at the back of the museum. Warm light, shelves packed with books and relics, a low leather couch that screamed bad decisions. Emmett closed the door behind them. "God, I'm sweating," Emmett said, undoing the top 2 buttons of his shirt. "I haven't talked that long without sarcasm in months." Paul crossed his arms, leaning against the desk. "You're good at it. Makes sense. You like the sound of your own voice." Emmett threw him a smirk. "You like the sound of my voice." Paul didn't answer, just watched as Emmett crossed the room, opened a cabinet, and pulled out a bottle of Glenlivet. He poured 2 fingers into a short glass and handed it to Paul. Their fingers brushed. The heat was immediate. "Cheers," Emmett said, "to rare sightings, mechanics in museums." Paul clinked his glass against Emmett's. To men in waistcoats who know how to talk. They drank. Silence stretched. Heavy. Heated. Full of things not said. Emmett moved first. Closed the distance between them in slow, unhurried steps. He took Paul's glass and set it on the desk beside his own. His fingers lingered on Paul's wrist. "I haven't stopped thinking about your hands," Emmett murmured. "The way you touched that engine. The way you touched me." Paul's breath caught. "That was about the car." "Was it?" Paul's voice dropped. "You're playing a game." Emmett leaned in until their foreheads nearly touched. "Only if you play back." Paul didn't answer with words. He reached out, gripped Emmett by the waist, and pulled him flush. Emmett gasped, fingers curling into Paul's chest. Their lips met hard. No patience, no pretense. Paul kissed like he worked, deliberate, rough, controlled. Emmett melted into him, mouth parting, hands gripping Paul's shoulders like he needed grounding. Paul backed him into the desk, lifted him onto it in one smooth motion. Emmett spread his legs without hesitation, moaning low against Paul's mouth. "You always this bossy?" Emmett whispered. "Only when I want something," Paul said, biting his jaw just below the ear. "Take it." Paul did. He unbuttoned Emmett's waistcoat, shirt, pushed the fabric aside to expose his chest. Emmett was lean and taut, muscles shifting under smooth skin. Paul kissed down his neck, dragged his teeth across his collarbone, and Emmett groaned, arching into him. His hands slid down, unfastening Paul's belt with practiced ease. "Fuck," Paul muttered against his throat. "You're dangerous." Emmett laughed breathlessly. "You're the one unzipping me." And then there was no more talking, just the clatter of buttons, the scrape of zippers, the low hum of London outside the window as they lost themselves in each other, one touch at a time. Chapter 4. Tube Station Tension. The museum was quiet again. Empty halls, lights dimmed, history tucked back into its glass cages. Emmett leaned against the desk, shirt half-buttoned, collar skewed, hair thoroughly ruined. He looked fucked in every sense and unapologetically smug about it. Paul stood beside him, belt fastened, jaw set, like he hadn't just pinned a man over 3,000-year-old clay fragments. They were both breathing easier now. The raw edge had dulled, but the air was still charged, like the room hadn't caught up to them yet. "I think we got some ancient dust on your ass," Paul muttered, eyeing the faint print of Emmett's bare thigh on the desk. "Worth it," Emmett said, straightening his shirt. "Bet Cleopatra never got railed over her own exhibit." Paul snorted. "That was Mesopotamian, not Egyptian." "Oh, I'm sorry, Professor Biceps. You're lucky I didn't break your hip." Emmett grinned. "You're lucky I didn't start moaning in Latin." Paul grabbed his jacket from the back of a chair, pulled it on without meeting Emmett's eyes. "You taking the tube?" Emmett blinked at the sudden shift in tone. "Ah, yeah. Unless you're offering to ride me home on your motorcycle." Paul didn't rise to the bait. He grabbed his gloves. "Let's go." Emmett followed him down the staff stairs and out into the London night. The air was sharp and damp, wet stone underfoot, a soft drizzle misting the street lamps. Paul walked ahead with that same focused stride, like he was heading into battle instead of toward a train station. Emmett shoved his hands into his coat pockets, trailing a few steps behind. He tried not to overthink, but the silence was heavy. Too heavy. They passed late-night pubs, a kebab stand, a pair of teenagers snogging against a phone box. Paul didn't look at any of it, just kept walking. "Did I break some unspoken mechanic curator code?" Emmett asked lightly, finally catching up. Paul didn't slow. "No code. You always this charming after sex." Paul stopped walking, turned. His green eyes locked onto Emmett's, unreadable in the low light. "You want to cuddle in a rom-com?" Emmett's grin faltered. "Jesus. Okay. I'm not a relationship guy," Paul said. "Not cruel, just honest. You knew that when you stepped into the garage. Right. Sex. Cars. Sarcasm. No strings." Paul's jaw clenched. "Exactly." They reached the entrance to the tube. Emmett paused at the top of the stairs. Trains hummed somewhere below. The city throbbed with late-night noise. "I don't need strings," Emmett said. "But I'm not a one-time oil change either." Paul looked at him. Something flickered. Guilt? Frustration? Want? But he nodded once. I'll call you when your clutch is done. Not holding my breath. Emmett descended the stairs without looking back. The hum of the underground swallowed him, and Paul stood alone on the sidewalk, fists clenched inside his coat. He told himself this was better, cleaner. He told himself that as Emmett's scent still lingered on his skin, and his pulse pounded like he was back under the hood, fixing something that didn't want to be fixed. Chapter 5. The Garage Affair. It was past midnight when Paul gave in. The garage was quiet, lit by a single hanging bulb swinging gently above the Alfa Romeo. Tools were put away, floor swept, radio off. But Paul couldn't stop pacing. The car was fixed, clutch smooth, brakes perfect. She purred like she wanted a cigarette after each test run. But none of that settled the knot in his gut. He'd told Emmett this wasn't a thing. Yet here he was, reaching for his phone, staring at the contacts saved under Emmett Hardy, fancy pants, thumb hovering. He swore under his breath, then tapped out the message. Your car's ready. Come get her. Tonight, if you want. It took less than a minute. Emmett, on my way. Should I bring lube or champagne? Paul didn't answer. 20 minutes later, Emmett strolled in wearing dark jeans, a black Henley, and a long navy coat that caught the light just right when he moved. His hair was windswept, cheeks flushed. He looked like trouble wrapped in silk. She's looking tight, Emmett said, running a hand over the Alpha's hood. His tone held double meaning, and they both knew it. Paul stayed near the workbench, arms crossed. Drives like new. Emmett looked up. You didn't call me here just to tell me that. Paul didn't move. No. Emmett closed the distance between them in slow, deliberate steps. So what is this, then? I don't know, Paul said, voice low. You got under my skin. Emmett raised an eyebrow. That's usually my line. They stood close enough now that Paul could smell his cologne, something faint and woody, almost unfairly intimate. You always push, Paul said. You always resist. Emmett reached up, thumb brushing the line of Paul's jaw, slow and deliberate. But you still called me. Paul caught his wrist, held it, didn't let go. I didn't ask you to stay, Paul said. Emmett leaned in. Then tell me to leave. Silence. Then Paul kissed him, rough, desperate, the kind of kiss that made Emmett gasp and dig his fingers into Paul's chest. There was nothing polite about it, just teeth and breath and hands and years of need clawing to the surface. Paul backed him into the Alpha, hips grinding hard enough to make Emmett moan. Wait, Emmett breathed. Is this legal? On a classic car. I'll buff it out later. Paul grabbed the front of Emmett's shirt, yanked it over his head, and tossed it onto the concrete floor. Emmett's skin flushed, nipples hard from the cold. Paul ran his hand down the line of his chest, slow, deliberate, teasing. Want to beg? Emmett whispered. Paul smirked. Wouldn't hate it. Fuck. Emmett groaned, hips twitching against the car door. You're such a bastard. Paul dropped to his knees. Emmett's back arched against the cool metal. Paul's hands gripped his thighs, mouth hot and wet and perfect. The garage echoed with filthy sounds, breathless moans, the sharp slap of flesh, the faint metallic groan of the car shifting under their weight. Emmett came with a broken gasp, fingers fisted in Paul's hair, knees trembling. Paul stood, wiped his mouth, and kissed him again, deep and slow this time. Less about power, more about claiming. They collapsed onto a workbench after, half-dressed and panting. Emmett laid with his head resting on Paul's shoulder, fingers tracing the faded tattoo on his forearm. You gonna tell me this isn't a thing again? Emmett asked, voice soft. Paul didn't answer right away. He stared at the garage ceiling, chest rising and falling. I don't do things, he said eventually. Emmett looked up at him. You're doing one now. Paul looked back. Yeah. And then softer, I know. Chapter 6. Brake Fluid and Morning Wood. Paul didn't remember falling asleep. 1 minute. Emmett was tracing lazy circles on his chest while they lay half-naked on a garage workbench. The next, Paul's eyes fluttered open to sunlight creeping through the grimy garage window and the smell of motor oil clinging to everything, including the man wrapped around him like a smug, shirtless octopus. Emmett's leg was hooked over his. His head was pressed to Paul's shoulder. And yes, Paul was hard. Morning wood, plain and simple. Totally normal. Just inconveniently pressed against the inside of Emmett's thigh. He didn't move. Maybe if he held perfectly still, the whole situation would dissolve like some kind of gay, naked Schrodinger's cuddle. Nope. Emmett shifted in his sleep, grinding ever so slightly into him. A groan slipped from Paul's throat before he could catch it. Emmett murmured, eyes still closed. Is that a torque wrench in your pocket? Or are you just finally admitting you like me? Paul scowled. Don't. Emmett opened one eye, his voice rough and smug with sleep. Don't what? Turn this into a rom-com. Emmett propped himself up on an elbow, hair sticking up in chaotic tufts, chest bare and flushed. You've got a face like someone who just woke up in the middle of a war zone. Relax. I'm not asking for a key to your flat. You're half naked in my garage. You pull my shirt off. Paul sat up with a groan, rubbing a hand over his face. His back ached. The metal bench had all the comfort of a torture rack. Remind me to install a bloody mattress next time. Oh, so there will be a next time? Emmett grinned, biting the inside of his cheek. Paul stood, grabbing his jeans from the floor. Coffee. That's the sexiest thing you've ever said to me. Emmett hopped off the bench, stretching tall, body lithe and unbothered, as if he hadn't just been railed next to a pile of brake pads 6 hours ago. Paul tried not to stare, failed, looked away, and fiddled with the ancient kettle in the back of the garage. There was only instant coffee. Paul didn't care. He needed caffeine. Emmett wandered over, slipping into his shirt and buttoning it halfway, somehow making wrinkled and wrecked look like a curated aesthetic. You always this quiet after sex? Emmett asked, leaning against the counter. Paul stirred the coffee with the handle of a wrench. I'm always this quiet. I noticed. Emmett took the mug Paul handed him and sipped. Tastes like burnt rubber and regret. Then it's working. They stood in silence, the hum of traffic outside filtering in through the cracked door. Emmett watched Paul over the rim of the mug, something softer now in his eyes. You don't have to panic, you know, Emmett said. I'm not trying to trap you. No grand declarations. No toothbrush in your bathroom. Paul leaned against the counter, arms crossed. I'm not panicking. Emmett gave him a look. Paul sighed. Maybe I just don't like waking up like that. Like what? Exposed. Emmett nodded. Fair. You looked adorable, by the way. Paul glared. Emmett set the mug down and stepped closer. Look, I don't need romance. I like this. The tension, the teasing, the sweat and bad decisions. But I also like you. He paused. Even when you're being a grumpy bastard with emotional constipation. Paul didn't answer right away. He watched the steam rise off their coffee like it might distract him from the fact that someone had finally gotten under his skin and wasn't apologizing for it. I'm not good at this, Paul admitted. You're not as bad as you think. Paul met his gaze. And you're not as casual as you pretend. Emmett smiled, slower this time. A little more honest. Maybe not. They stood close again. Not kissing. Not touching. Just looking at each other like two men who'd stopped pretending they didn't want more, while still not quite ready to say it. Paul broke the silence. You're free Friday? Emmett's eyes lit. Are you asking me on a date, Fletcher? I'm asking if you want to come over and help me rebuild a gearbox. Emmett laughed. God, you're romantic. Paul turned away, grabbing his coat. Don't be late. Chapter 7. Lectures in Lust. The museum's rotunda buzzed with chatter, clinking glasses, and that low hum of forced intellectual interest that only occurred when free wine met ancient artifacts. Paul hated it already. He stood in the back, arms crossed, black t-shirt too tight in the shoulders, eyes fixed on Emmett like he was waiting for a storm to hit. And in a way, he was. Emmett was on the small platform at the center of the room, halfway through a lecture titled Desire and Divinity, Sexual Symbolism in Ancient Mediterranean Art. He was in full curator mode, shirt tucked, sleeves rolled, voice smooth as honey. He held the crowd effortlessly, pacing slowly as he pointed toward a large slide of a marble statue that left nothing to the imagination. And here we have Priapus, Emmett said, smiling at the snickers in the crowd. The Roman god of fertility. You'll notice the, generous proportions. Romans believed virility symbolized power, prosperity. And let's be honest, it also made for some fantastic garden decor. Laughter rippled through the room. Paul didn't crack a smile. Emmett continued. But it wasn't just about sex, it was about presence. commanding a space, holding attention, speaking without words. He wasn't looking at the statue. He was looking at Paul. Paul's jaw tightened. The bastard was flirting with him, in front of 30 people, using mythology. A woman beside Paul leaned to her friend and whispered, "God, he's hot. Do you think he's single?" Paul didn't move, didn't speak, but his fingers curled into fists in his pockets. Emmett moved into the next slide. Another sculpture, this one of two male figures locked in an embrace. Greek art celebrated physical connection without shame. Intimacy was part of culture, not something hidden. These pieces weren't meant to scandalize. They were meant to reflect. His gaze swept the room again, settled on Paul. "Desire doesn't always have to be silent," he said, voice quieter now. "Sometimes it's just waiting for someone to stop pretending." The crowd was silent, rapt. Paul's blood was boiling. After the Q&A, Emmett disappeared into the hallway leading to the staff wing. Paul followed without hesitation. He found him leaning against the wall near a display of clay fertility idols, sipping sparkling water and smirking like he knew exactly what he was doing. "You enjoy yourself?" Paul growled. Emmett tilted his head, all mock innocence. "Educational, wasn't it? You gave a goddamn lecture on sex while fucking me." "Guilty." Emmett took another sip. "But you didn't leave. You watched every second." "What does that say?" Paul stepped in, crowd forgotten. "Says you've got a smart mouth that's about to get you in trouble." Emmett's smile sharpened. "Is that a promise?" Paul didn't respond. He just shoved him gently, but firmly, back against the wall, crowd still murmuring in the gallery behind them. His hand planted on Emmett's chest, flat and possessive. Emmett's breath hitched. "Paul, I don't like being played with," Paul said, voice low. "And I don't like pretending I don't want to fuck you every time I talk about ancient statues." Paul grabbed the front of Emmett's shirt. "You're a menace. You're hard," Emmett whispered, smirking, and in a public hallway. Paul kissed him, rough and fast, all tongue and teeth and frustration, pinning Emmett between the cool plaster and his own solid body. Emmett moaned into his mouth, hands clutching Paul's waist, dragging him closer. The hallway was dim, private enough. Emmett's hips rolled up, grinding against him through layers of fabric. Paul groaned into his neck, hands sliding low, gripping him through his slacks. Emmett gasped. Someone could see. Paul bit his earlobe. "Let them." Emmett shivered. "You're insane. You wanted a reaction." Emmett hissed through his teeth as Paul rutted against him, slow and deliberate, breath hot against his throat. "God, you're so fucking good at this. And you're gonna shut up before I bend you over the artifact case." Emmett laughed, breathless, wrecked. "Fuck, I love when you get like this." Paul kissed him again, slower now, dragging his lips down Emmett's jaw, breathing him in like he needed this, needed him. But then he pulled back, just enough to let the air cool between them. "We're not fucking in a museum," Paul said. "Why not?" Paul smirked. "Because next time I make you moan like that, it's not going to be quiet." He walked away without looking back. And Emmett stood there, chest heaving, half-hard in his own museum, wondering when the hell he'd lost control of the game, and why it felt so good. Chapter 8. Naked Truths. The night was unusually quiet for London. Rain threatened in the clouds, the kind that hadn't yet started falling, but was just waiting to fuck up someone's walk home. Paul's flat was dim and clean, not tidy by aesthetic, just functional. Minimalist in the way only a man who never stayed still long could manage. One couch, one lamp, no art, no clutter, just leather, brick, and him. Emmett stood by the window, nursing a glass of scotch, watching the street below like it might tell him something he didn't already know. Paul was behind him, silent, sitting at the edge of the couch like he didn't quite know how to be in his own space now that someone else had filled it with laughter and warmth and sharp edges that didn't match the furniture. Emmett turned, finally. "You're quiet again." Paul looked up, eyes unreadable. "I warned you. You also kissed me in a hallway like you want to break me in half." Paul's mouth twitched. "You didn't seem to mind." Emmett set the glass down. "I didn't." He walked over and stopped just in front of Paul. "But I'm getting a little tired of pretending this is only about sex." Paul's shoulders tensed. He didn't answer. Emmett crouched in front of him, elbows resting on Paul's knees, voice low. You like control. I get it. You like knowing what's coming, what to fix where the tools go. You want things neat, mechanical. Paul's jaw tightened. And I'm not a carburetor, Paul. I'm not something you can wrench into place when it's convenient and shove into storage when it makes you uncomfortable. Paul didn't speak, but his hand found the back of Emmett's neck, thumb pressing into the soft skin just under his hairline. I didn't ask for this, he said. Emmett met his eyes. Neither did I, but here we are. Silence. Then Paul said quietly, I don't do well with soft. Emmett blinked. You think I'm soft? No, that's the problem. Paul stood, walked a few steps away, ran a hand through his hair. You get under me, under everything. You make it hard to keep the walls up. Maybe you don't need them anymore. Paul turned, eyes flashing. You don't know what I've done to keep things simple. People don't get close. Not anymore. Emmett walked up to him slowly, hands at his sides. Then why let me in? Paul exhaled. Because you made it look easy. Emmett's voice dropped. It wasn't. And then, like it was inevitable, Paul pulled him in. No urgency this time. No teeth, no tension. Just warmth. A slow press of lips. A hand at Emmett's waist. One at his jaw. Steady. Grounding. They kissed like it meant something this time. Emmett guided him backward toward the bedroom. No rush. No games. Just skin to skin, size shared like secrets. They undressed each other slowly, clothes hitting the floor without care. Paul's body was strong, solid, marked with old scars and stories he hadn't told. Emmett touched him like he was listening anyway. They lay together, nothing frantic. Paul was inside him before either of them spoke again. Slow and deep, arms wrapped around each other like the space between them had finally given in. It wasn't about getting off. It was about staying in it, letting it burn, letting it be tender, letting it hurt just a little. Afterward, Emmett lay on Paul's chest, both of them sweaty and silent. Paul broke it first. I haven't done that in a long time. What? Made love. Paul winced. Don't call it that. Emmett smirked into his skin. Why not? It kind of was. Paul didn't argue. His hand just drifted through Emmett's hair, fingers dragging slowly, lazily, like he finally wasn't afraid to hold on. I'm scared, he admitted. Emmett tilted his head up. Good. So, am I. Paul looked at him. And for the first time since the garage, since the kiss, since everything, he didn't pull away. He just said, stay. And Emmett did. Chapter 9. Grease under the fingernails. The day started with coffee. Real coffee. Not instant. Emmett had insisted, showing up at Paul's garage with 2 lattes from a smug little shop in Notting Hill and a croissant that somehow managed to survive the tube ride. Paul grunted something that probably meant thank you and took a sip. Emmett leaned against the workbench, eyes scanning the garage. You know, if you moved just 2 of these shelves, you could fit a couch in here. Maybe a rug. Mood lighting. Paul stared at him. This is a garage. Emmett smirked. And you're dating a man with strong opinions about feng shui and curated playlists. Deal with it. Paul didn't correct him. He just reached for a wrench and said, grab those spark plugs. Emmett rolled his eyes but obeyed, sleeves already rolled up, his perfectly clean jeans minutes away from becoming a sacrifice to grease and grime. They worked side by side in quiet rhythm. Emmett handing Paul tools, asking questions, getting laughed at for most of them, but learning. Until the front bell chimed. Paul didn't look up. Doors open. The voice that followed was low, familiar, and about as welcome as a blown head gasket. Well, thought I'd find you under a hood. Paul froze. His jaw tensed before he slowly straightened and turned. Emmett glanced up, already sensing the shift in atmosphere. The man in the doorway was tall, maybe a few years older than Paul. Buzz cut, military posture, expensive coat. The kind of guy who always looked like he was about to order someone to clean up a mess. Ryan, Paul said, voice neutral. Still wearing oil-like cologne, Ryan said, stepping inside. His eyes flicked toward Emmett. Didn't know you had company. Paul stepped forward, subtly placing himself between them. What do you want? Ryan shrugged. Just in town. Thought I'd check in. Catch up. We're caught up now. Emmett watched the tension coil through Paul's body like a wound spring. His fingers itched, but he kept his mouth shut for now. Ryan's gaze landed back on him. I'm guessing you're not just here to change tires. Depends, Emmett said, voice calm, measured. You here to stir shit or just mark territory? Paul exhaled hard through his nose, pinching the bridge of it like a man 2 seconds from snapping. Don't. Ryan smirked. I didn't mean anything. Just surprised. You never used to let anyone in, especially someone like him. Emmett stepped forward then, one hand still stained with engine oil. Someone like me? You know what I mean, Ryan said. Suits. Smiles. The soft kind. Paul snapped. You're still the same prick who walked out when it got inconvenient. His voice dropped low. Cold. You don't get to walk back in and play judge. Ryan's jaw tightened. This how you talk to people who knew you before you decided to pretend you had feelings? Paul didn't answer. He stepped closer, chest to chest. Get out. Ryan looked between them. Then, without another word, he turned and walked out, the door slamming harder than necessary behind him. The silence after was heavy. Emmett wiped his hand on a rag and walked over. Who was he? Paul stared at the floor for a long beat. Old unit. Afghanistan. We were close. For a while. Emmett didn't push. He waited. Paul finally met his eyes. He left when I told him I wanted something more than what we did in secret. Emmett stepped closer, touching Paul's forearm. And now? Paul hesitated. Then, now I've got someone who brings overpriced coffee and makes fun of my socket wrenches. Emmett smiled. Progress. They stood in the middle of the garage, grease on their hands, tension still hanging in the air, but something else too. Something earned. Paul leaned in and kissed him. Greasy hands, dirty shirts, engine parts everywhere. And still the kiss was soft. Real. He pulled back, eyes clearer now. You staying tonight? Emmett grinned. You asked like it's optional. Chapter 10. Full Throttle. The garage was closed for the day. Not because Paul had anything planned. He just needed the silence. Or maybe he needed the noise of Emmett in the next room, humming to himself as he rearranged Paul's tiny bookshelf like it was a goddamn art installation. Paul sat at the workbench, hands idle for once. No wrench, no engine, just him, and the weight of something he didn't want to lose. Because it had stopped being casual somewhere between the hallway kiss and the night Emmett stayed without asking. Somewhere between the jokes and the moans and the moments after sex when neither of them bothered to reach for their clothes. He heard a crash. Something small. Wooden. Everything all right in there? He called. Your taste in fiction is offensive, Paul. Emmett shouted back. You own 2 copies of War and Peace, Zero Poetry, and a Top Gear annual from 2004. This is not balance. Paul smirked. It's function. It's repression. Paul stood and walked into the living room. Emmett was barefoot, shirt half-buttoned, standing over a pile of books with the exact expression of someone deeply judging a man's soul based on his reading habits. I don't see your library here, Paul said. I didn't think I was staying long enough to need one. That stopped them both. Emmett met his eyes. Was I wrong? Paul stepped closer. No. Another beat. Then Emmett exhaled. I've been waiting for the moment this cracks. For the awkward silence. But let's take a step back. Now, I'm not built for this talk. I'm not built for this, Paul said, voice low. Emmett stiffened. But I want anyway, Paul added. That shut Emmett up. Paul walked over, wrapped a hand around the back of his neck, firm and steady. You came in like a fucking hurricane. Loud, annoying, beautiful. And I thought I could keep it casual. I thought I could fuck you and keep my walls. You really are bad at romance, Emmett whispered, eyes stinging. Paul smirked. You knew that when you walked in. Emmett laughed, breath shaky. Yeah, but I didn't think I'd want it anyway. Paul kissed him. Not hungry. Not desperate. Just home. They didn't undress quickly this time. No tearing clothes. Just slow hands and soft groans. Paul undid Emmett's buttons like he was unwrapping something fragile. Emmett touched Paul like he was grounding himself, like every inch was familiar and new at once. They moved to the couch. Limbs tangled, mouths wet, Paul's breath ragged as he finally said, Stay. More than tonight. Emmett froze, his eyes wide. I want you here. With me. The books. The coffee. The clutter. All of it. You sure? Emmett asked, voice breaking slightly. Paul nodded. Let me be soft. For you. Emmett didn't say anything. Just pulled Paul on top of him, hips lifting, moaning as their bodies aligned and slid, bare skin against bare skin, heat growing fast. They made love. No pretense this time. No tension. Just rhythm. Just breath. Just two men who finally stopped pretending they didn't care. Later, tangled and sweat-slicked, Emmett buried his face in Paul's neck. You'll still growl at me when I reorganize your tools, right? Paul chuckled. Every fucking time. Emmett kissed his jaw. Good. I like when you get bossy. Paul kissed his shoulder. You staying tonight? Emmett shifted against him. I live here now, remember? Paul smiled into the dark. Right. Outside, the rain started. Inside, they were finally still.